All right, welcome everyone to the Alaska Sea Life Center. My name is Darin. I'm an education specialist here, and we often get asked, how do people get jobs at a place like the Alaska Sea Life Center? So every single person here at the Alaska Sea Life Center has a different story to tell as far as how they got to this point in their career. Mine is different from all of them. Today I'm going to share you my story, and I hope you get the opportunity to hear other folks' stories as well about how they got to the point in their career where they are now. But it is interesting that people working at an aquarium or a zoo or a museum sometimes come from unusual places and odd walks of life. So what I'm going to do today is give you just like a brief overview of what to think about when you're considering a career, whether it be in the aquarium or zoo or museum industry or elsewhere, the kinds of things you want to be aware of and think about for your own self. And then I'll give you an example from my career path as far as how I got to this point where I am here in Seward, Alaska at the Alaska Sea Life Center. So we're going to be talking today about the 3 E's, and I'm going to go one at a time. The first E is education. And depending on the type of career that you're interested in, your education might be something like a college degree, and it might need to be something specific. In my case, it was in environmental engineering. And I actually have a master's in that. So I spent 7 years in college getting a master's degree in environmental engineering. You might ask, do I use that degree now? I would say yes. I am not working as an environmental engineer, but I do use all the skills that I developed over the course of those years of schooling on a day-to-day basis, whether it's just working with spreadsheets as I manage the details of the logistics here at the Alaska Sea Life Center's education department, or understanding the technology that we're using to connect with you live, or being able to relate to the scientists here at the Alaska Sea Life Center. I have had their job in the past. And so for me to be able to draw on that experience and work with the really diverse team that we have here at the Alaska Sea Life Center is fantastic. But I am not working as an environmental engineer, no. I'm not sure if I would have liked that, to be honest. After 7 years of schooling, I was ready for something different. And that brings me to the second E. That is enthusiasm. This is a tricky one. Oops. With a third hump on the M, it's really tricky. All right, with enthusiasm, you have to find this within yourself. And so for every single person, this is different. This is not something that your job necessarily requires. But I promise you, if you enter into a job situation and you're not enthusiastic, it won't be pleasant. It might not last very long, but it's not what is good for you and probably not what is good for the job site either. So in order to find out if you are enthusiastic about something, the best way is to volunteer. So let me show you how I addressed both of these 2 E's, starting with my personal story here. I actually grew up in southern Illinois, right there, just east of the Mississippi River. You notice, woot woot, there are no oceans within many, many, many hundreds of miles of that spot where I grew up. I never took a class about the ocean. I took classes in lots and lots and lots of math classes and a couple of science classes, but just the basics because that was what was required to get my degree in engineering. I did that here at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, there in central Illinois, surrounded by cornfields and soybean fields. Again, no ocean in sight whatsoever. So that was the beginning of my education. How did I start to develop my enthusiasm? Well, when I was taking a break from all those math classes, I went and talked to a professor, and I basically just found a professor in the Department of civil and environmental engineering who did something that sounded interesting to me. And to try it out, I went to that professor. I literally knocked on his door, and I asked him, hey, what you do sounds interesting. Can I help out sometime? Just go out and help you. And what that professor did was a lot of what we call biomonitoring. So in order to determine the effectiveness of, say, wastewater treatment plants, you can monitor the animals living upstream and downstream of where that plant discharges its water, and you can see, are there any differences? So that was the kind of thing that professor studied. It sounded interesting to me. I really had no idea what it was. Ultimately, I put on a pair of waders and walked up a stream in the freezing cold in central Illinois. A stream was an irrigation ditch that was straight for miles with straight sides. But inside that stream were all these fish, and that was what we were looking for. I followed these graduate students. They were doing the heavy-duty work. They were actually electroshocking the fish, which is a way to temporarily kind of almost like paralyze the fish and then hold them for a very short period of time, measure them, identify them, get them back in the water, and they recover. My job was to catch some of those fish that they had been shocking. So I walked up the stream with a net in my hands, caught whatever I could, and then handed that over to these graduate students. They did all the identifying, measuring, weighing, whatever they needed to do, and I just stood out of the way. As weird as that might sound to some people, I loved it. There we had the second E, enthusiasm. It turned out it was great. I could have hated it, but all I did was knock on a door and try something out. If I really hated it, then I could have moved on to the next door and tried something different. Turned out I loved it. I ended up working with that professor as a volunteer for several years, and ultimately he actually was able to find a little bit of money to pay me. Not enough to build a career on, but I had a part-time job with him for a little bit, identifying teeny tiny creatures under a microscope in a dank, dark lab in the very, very basement of the engineering building. Again, might sound like torture to some people, but I thought it was super cool. More enthusiasm. So, that professor assisted me in furthering my education. Let me show you where I went next. After Illinois, for graduate school, I went west to Oregon State University, go Beavers, to work on my master's degree. And while I was there, I was able to work on the third E. So I had some education. I was still continuing my education, of course. I developed my enthusiasm and found out, indeed, I do love just sort of counting animals and identifying them. Then I needed to build some experience. And in order to do that, guess what? Start by volunteering. Because if you don't volunteer, then you can't show people that you have experience, and it's much harder to get into a paid position. So I started out as a volunteer back in Illinois, walking up the stream with a net, catching some fish, handing them off to the grad students. Then they trusted me with identifying tiny little creatures under a microscope. And then that professor helped me to get a paid assistantship out at Oregon State University, which allowed me to work on my master's degree and further my education, continue with my enthusiasm, and build more experience. While I was working on that master's degree, I found a few other positions that were still back related to streams and fish. Turns out that's really what I love. Much as I love numbers and math and equations, I really enjoyed all that stuff. I just kept gravitating toward paddling a canoe down a river or floating down the river in a raft, shocking fish, counting them, measuring them, and I continued to build more and more experience through that. I got a couple of positions with the EPA out there in Oregon, Environmental Protection Agency, and I learned even more skills. I worked in the laboratory, both through graduate school and at the EPA, and then I finished my master's degree, and I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I was super enthusiastic about certain things. I had an education, and I had some experience. I don't think I was quite ready for a job, per se. And back to the map, I took a larger leap this time, still related to volunteering, from Oregon. I took a short journey back to Illinois to spend a little time with my parents before breaking the news that I was leaving for the United States Peace Corps in Papua New Guinea, which is just north of Australia. And I spent a little over 2 years in the Peace Corps working as a teacher. Now, nowhere in my spiel thus far have I said, yep, I went to school and studied to become a teacher. The Peace Corps is a really interesting, fantastically challenging way to develop your experience. And it's a job like no other. I became a teacher here in Papua New Guinea. I taught students everything from math to physics to advanced chemistry to home economics and how to make pancakes and fried rice and how to sew trousers, apparently they call them, because pants are underwear in their local language. So I taught young ladies how to sew trousers in Papua New Guinea as part of my experience there in the Peace Corps. That helped to build my experience as an educator. And it turns out that no matter how you develop that experience, if you're really enthusiastic about it, then your experience will show what it needs to. You'll find the right experiences. If you're not enthusiastic about something, you're not going to seek out the right experiences, and you may not end up on a path that you enjoy. For me, after the Peace Corps, where I was a teacher for 2 years, it was super challenging, not going to lie. That was a tough job, but the students were great, and it was really interesting to teach students material that perhaps they wouldn't be able to access without teachers from outside of their country being able to come in and do that for basically for free. And the Peace Corps was a good outfit. It helped take care of us health-wise and get us just enough background in how to teach that we could do that. And it was super rewarding. Well, then I had to come back home, of course. I guess there's no requirement that you have to come back home at the end of the Peace Corps. But let me show you where I went after that. On the map here, from Papua New Guinea, on the way home, I was able to travel through the Himalayas, do a little trek through Nepal, a little bit in Thailand here, and then stopped off in Spain on my way home, made it back just in time for my sister's wedding. Shout out to Ange. That was a fabulous reason to come back home. And then I really, really had no idea what I wanted to do. So I kind of sat still for a few months until my parents started to get a little restless. And I was able to find a job back in Oregon. My enthusiasm brought me back again. And this time my job was not super glamorous. It was actually counting dead salmon on the shores of a river in Oregon. And I spent a winter doing that, then had a little brief period where I really didn't know what I was going to do next. The next thing I knew, I got a job, a full-time paid job as a marine scientist. Here I am in the ocean as a marine scientist. Never had a class about the ocean, never had a job on the ocean before, but I was working as a marine scientist. Here's the highlight of Darin Trobaugh's career, everyone. I was a hovercraft pilot on the coast of Oregon for one glamorous year. Amazing. And then, to make a very long story slightly shorter, I met this fabulous lady, and she got a job up here at the Alaska Sea Life Center, and so did I. And here we are, a little over 17 years later, riding the wave. This is a fabulous place. So how did I end up as an education specialist at a science and education facility? I had experience as a scientist, only a couple of classes in science. I had a degree in engineering, which took some convincing to actually get people to give me jobs in other fields, because engineering, people just assumed I should just be a kind of nerdy math geek engineer. It took me a while to convince them that I'm actually kind of cool. And then, as far as the education, I had 2 weeks of education training in the Peace Corps, and then 2 years of experience as an actual teacher in the Peace Corps, and that all together with my science positions, which again started out as volunteering, all led to me having just enough of the right pieces to fit into the team here at the Alaska Sea Life Center. Back to enthusiasm, I love it here. This place is awesome. It's why we're here right now, spending time 6 feet apart from each other with my team off camera and trying to do what we can to bring the Alaska Sea Life Center to you. This is what we love. It's why we're here. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, put them into that live chat in the next minute or so. We're going to put it on the kelp forest habitat and take a look for any questions you might have. Thanks a bunch. All right, well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Darin, and for more videos like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video, give us a thumbs up, like us, and we will also have more live events on our Facebook page. If you would like to follow us on Facebook, there's all sorts of fabulous information there. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.